Hi all, Eric here. Today we're going to be taking a look at creating an asset from start to finish in Crowfall. The last video I put out was just strictly the sculpting of a character from start to finish, but I thought it would be cool if we took an asset all the way from sculpting, from the very beginning to going in-game. In order to do that, I thought let's do a helmet, since it's kind of a small asset and it's something relatively straightforward, and that way we could kind of talk about each step. So just like the Confessor video, we're still going to go through the sculpting, which is what we're watching now, and I kind of wanted to show my process when I'm trying to make an asset completely in ZBrush. And as you can see, like with a lot of things, I'll start with a primitive like a sphere or something like that, and then kind of just mush that around basically and try to get like a cool shape and stuff. And then once I kind of like it, I can start using a lot of ZBrush's really cool tools like Z-Remesher and Dynamesh and stuff like that. And then I basically start building all the pieces that the object that I'm working on is going to need off of that original base. So that's what we're kind of seeing here, where I'm masking areas off on the helmet and then extruding those masked areas as geometry that we can then use to create the other pieces of it. 1 second. Okay. Sorry. Just a quick pause. So since we've seen the Confessor video before and I talked a lot about sculpting, I figured I would go through this thread and see if there's any questions I can answer until we get to some of the other parts of the video. Okay, so Nazdar asks, did you learn using software or do you have a classical sculpting background? I learned using software. I learned on Maya originally to model and stuff. In terms of sculpting, I started on ZBrush 2, which was crazy different than ZBrush now. Like, it was basically just, here's a mesh and blob a bunch of stuff on it. Like, they've come so far since ZBrush 2. I can't even imagine what the first one was like. I've never even seen it. But yeah, I started learning 3D in 2006, 2007, kind of around there. I went to Full Sail, and then after that I moved out to Austin and was able to get a job pretty quickly, and I've kind of been doing it since. But I do know some people who were classical sculptors and then kind of came to ZBrush and came to 3D, and most of the time they're amazing. Like they come from a very traditional background and stuff, and so they have fundamentals that sometimes aren't always taught at 3D specific schools and stuff. So yeah, I'd love to take some sculpting classes and stuff, but we'll see, right? Okay, let's see what else. Nazdar also asked, what's your favorite thing to sculpt? What's the hardest thing to sculpt? I guess my favorite thing to sculpt is, I don't know, I like humanoids and I like people a lot, like just cool armor and stuff. I think is awesome, which I think humans in general are also the hardest thing to sculpt, because you need to have a really good grasp of anatomy and stuff, and it's something I'm always working on and learning and trying to improve and stuff. And I think that's the case for all artists, because like we as people, whether you're an artist or not, we see faces and see people every single day, hundreds of times a day or whatever, and so it's really easy to spot when something looks weird, right? Like, you can see a character in a game or something and know something about it looks weird, even though you might not be able to articulate what it might be. And so, you know, it takes having to constantly improve and figure out what makes a person and understanding all the nuances of anatomy and facial structure and stuff like that. Yeah. I do like creatures and stuff, but I actually haven't done a lot of like creatures and monsters and stuff like that. It's something I want to do more of. But I just haven't gotten a chance to, really. Gilgamer asks, ZBrush, Mudbox, or other? ZBrush for me. I know some people who use Mudbox. Mudbox is super awesome. But I like ZBrush. It's got a lot of cool buttons to click, and I'm just used to it. I've been using it for so long now. Gamer also asks, are normal maps generated directly from your sculpts? Yep, we're going to see that in a little bit. The process from going from a high poly to a low poly. Do I make my polygonal models? Yes, I do. Does Ace have a 3D printer? We don't, but I would sure as heck love to have one. I do 3D printing a bit in my spare time, and I've been playing around with it. I don't have a printer myself yet, but I'm thinking about buying one. But I would love if we did statues and stuff like that. I'm sure it's something we'll look at in the future, but our focus is just making a cool game right now, and all the stuff that takes, it's a lot. So maybe when the team's bigger and stuff and we have more time, we can kind of look at stuff like that. And lastly, Gamer asks, do you 3D paint? Sometimes I 3D paint, depending on the type of texture work I'm doing. Like if it's hand-painted stuff, kind of like WoW style, I'll probably 3D paint. But since this stuff is a lot of like material work, I have other software that I use, and we'll take a look at that in a little bit. Just to hop back over, so this helmet's almost finished in ZBrush. I've gone through and added most of the details and stuff, and kind of blocked everything out. All right. Retopology. Okay. Once the ZBrush model is done and sculpted and looking pretty, we have to take that model and make a low poly version of it, the version that's actually going to be in the game, because the ZBrush model is millions upon millions of polys, and obviously that won't run. So you make a low poly that will work. And basically how we do that is we export all the pieces of the high poly model. As you can see here, this is like the base part of the helmet, and then there's the other pieces like that front thing and the plume holster thing, whatever. And then I import that into a program called Topogun. There's other programs. You can do it in Maya. You can do it in 3D Coat. You can even do it in ZBrush, but I like Topogun because all it's for is doing this, and I think it's pretty cool. And basically import the high poly, and then you can draw verts and edges and stuff directly on the model, so you use it as a reference to build the low poly object, and it's super easy. Like, it's just clicking points and stuff. The challenging part comes into trying to make a good looking shape and a good representation of the model with as few verts and edges that you can use, like the fewer the better, but you also don't want to sacrifice the quality of the shape and stuff. So that's kind of the balance. It's making it look good but also being efficient, especially in a game where we want to kind of make sure everything is efficient as possible, so we can have a lot of people on screen and make sure it runs well in multiplayer and all of that, basically. And then once you're finished basically building the low poly, you transfer that detail through baking from the high poly to the low poly. And that's, if you ever heard of like a normal map, basically that's what that is. It takes the information from the high poly and bakes it to the low poly version of the mesh. I'm not going to show the baking, but we are going to take a look at the UVs here in a moment. This is almost finished. The last little bit, and then you have to do the inside, of course. Like ta-da-da-da-da-da. But this is kind of like the tedious part of 3D. You get to do all this awesome sculpting in the beginning, and it's super creative and artistic. And then you have this middle period where you've got to do all this kind of grindy, busy work, the technical work, building the stuff and making sure it's set up correctly for the engine and stuff like that. And I don't mind it, but when you have a lot of it, or it's like a whole character and stuff, it can be tedious. So it's just one of those things that you have to do, and it's one of those things that's going to get more automated as tools get better. But for the meantime, it's still the best to do it by hand. And it's pretty straightforward, but I thought it would be good to at least show it since it is part of the process, and it's a big part of the process. And yeah. So up next should be unwrapping. Not quite. Basically going through now and just trying to cut any verts that I can, make it as efficient as possible. Still trying to keep that silhouette, but also trying to cut off any verts that I don't need and making sure everything's nice and spaced. Unwrapping. Okay. Once we have all our low poly pieces kind of built and ready to go, we need to unwrap those on a 2D map so that we can texture them. So this is just going to be a glimpse at that. And you can see the object is on the left, and on the right there are the unwrapped pieces. And the challenging part of unwrapping is basically trying to fit everything into a texture as efficiently as possible, so you have very little wasted space. We want to pack all the pieces of the model in as tightly as possible, so we're getting maximum texture resolution for texturing. So for texturing, I use a software called Quixel, and some people like Quixel a lot, some people don't. I like it for a couple of reasons. The first is that it's really quick to kind of get something textured and going, and you can like quickly go in and select different materials and adjust those materials. Like, oh, I want this to be more reflective, I want this to be less reflective. But I also really like Quixel because it's a good file manager. It has tabs for each one of your texture maps and stuff. So in general, what I'll do is I'll use Quixel just to quickly put a texture on everything. So I'm able to just get the gold on, get the metal on, get the plume material going, stuff like that. And then once I kind of like it and I'm kind of seeing where the textures are going, I'll go in by hand and start to clean stuff up and kind of do more manual work. But just to be able to get materials on it super fast, make adjustments, and kind of get a feel for the object without wasting too much time, it's absolutely awesome. So that's what we're seeing here, just kind of selecting materials, putting them on, and then once I'm kind of happy with the materials that I've chosen, I'll go in and start to clean it up and texture it and add little nuance and stuff. And obviously this helmet's part of an armor set for the Centaur, so I'm going to stick that bad boy on its head and kind of see how it's working with the rest of it, frame it in Unity, just kind of see, move the light around and stuff. And I'm like, okay, this stuff is matching. And then now I'm kind of going in by hand and masking off certain areas and doing cleanup work and all of that. Kind of just looking around. Quixel's really cool because it's got all these like interesting mask functions and stuff. You can isolate just the edges or just the cavities, and that way I can do things like get the highlights on the edges of the mesh super easy, and then I can go in by hand and kind of clean that up and make sure it looks good. But yeah, we're kind of just working back and forth. I'm able to save my maps directly in the Unity, so I can just tab back in the Unity and see the results, which is really useful. There was a seam there that was messed up, so I fixed that. Like, thankfully that's a little better now. Setting up the materials, and then here I am basically going in and kind of tightening some stuff up, adding some texture, cleaning up edges, the little stuff that maybe Quixel missed. And it's pretty straightforward. We're using physical-based rendering on Crowfall, so all the different maps for the textures include the albedo map, which is the diffuse we're looking at now, the normal map, the ambient occlusion, the specular map. The specular kind of defines how shiny an object is, and then the gloss map, which defines the roughness of a surface. So, when light hits an object that has a lot of like surface bumpiness, the highlight's not as sharp versus something like glass that's very smooth. The highlight's very, very sharp. In that map, you can basically go in and define each material, how rough it is. And that helps really make the materials more believable and make the object as a whole more believable. And a big part of this is just kind of going back and forth, trying something, seeing how it looks, coming back, adjusting it a little bit. It can be tedious, but it's also rewarding to kind of see things start to come together. Like you've been looking at this model as a gray object or as a half put together object, for most of its creation, and now finally it's starting to actually look like something and look like what it's going to be in the game. So that's really cool. So it's a little stroby because we're alt tabbing back and forth super fast, but it just kind of shows, it takes a lot of adjustment and stuff like that. And I want to make sure it matches the rest of the armor, and so I'm checking it against that. And now it's really just the nitpicky polish of making sure everything's clean and trying to get some nice contrast and separating these surfaces and stuff like that. And it looks like this is just about done. Just last little tweaks here or there. Making sure everything looks good and stuff. And then we don't worry about the inside too much. And then the final. And kind of here it is. The final thing with textures and materials on it. Looking pretty shiny and stuff. And then we'll check it on the Centaur himself. Rah, Centaur, Legionnaire. Thank you for watching. Be sure to check out our other videos and let us know other stuff that you might want to see. Maybe we can get some of the concept artists to do some how-to videos or something like that. Thanks again. Crowfall.